Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and these are your sun and rising sign horoscopes for the month of December 2019. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the air signs, Libra, Aquarius, and Gemini. So it's a big month, as always, but made a little bit bigger because of the solar eclipse coming through this month, the entrance of Jupiter into the sign of Capricorn, and who can forget the winter solstice, as well as the fact that in January, we have a massive conjunction between Saturn and Pluto coming up. So it really is a big time. I mean, there's the usual suspects. Every month is filled with drama, but there's a lot going on this month because of a major move from Jupiter, a big eclipse, and then we're on the precipice of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So let's take a look for Libras. I've categorized this into basically four groups. I have some transits happening in Capricorn that we're going to start off by talking about. So for Librans, the Capricorn energy that's constellating right now is happening in your fourth house with so much emphasis on the fourth house. This is the house of home, family, roots, father, parents, the past, the mysteries, things that are hidden deep below or exist in our past, as well as just our base or foundation of support in life. For example, your home or your living environment, but everything that supports you at the most basic foundational level. Jupiter entering this house for you right now means that for a whole year, there is expansion happening at the roots, but it is happening through a time of hardship or difficulty, where it's a little bit more serious, or there's just, again, this more, Saturnine, Capricornian energy behind it that's saying, this is a little heavier. This energy has just a little bit more seriousness behind it. Jupiter likes to be very expansive and positive. In Saturn's sign, it's not that it's not going to be uplifting you around the area of home and family in the next year. It's just that it also involves heavier themes or some heavier lessons, you could say. Now, later in the month, you're going to have a new moon solar eclipse on the 25th into the 26th in this house, suggesting a very new chapter happening around home and family, your property, and so forth. Venus is going to move through a conjunction to Saturn and Pluto, and that's going to happen between the 10th and the 14th, suggesting that, the topic of relationships within the home or family, the topic of love, marriage, romance, sexuality, in relation to home and family, or just in general, could be going through a pretty deep moment of transformation, hardship, and difficulty, but ultimately one that's very regenerative because Pluto loves to sort of, press the reset. It's like a hard reset, when everything's moving really slow and kind of nothing's really responding in your computer or something, like, all right, I'm going to unplug this and plug it back in, that's Pluto in a sense. So there's a kind of death, the unplugging part, and then the plugging back in. We say this also because this month, Jupiter is going to be making a trine to Uranus in the 8th house, which is the house of death. So there's a sense of like rebooting, restoration, rebirth around home, family, and roots. And it's getting a kind of charge or a surge that should ultimately be positive from the trine to Uranus, from the conjunction from Venus to Pluto. There is regeneration and expansion happening, growth that will come, but it is going to come through the, potential hardships and death and rebirth of both the 8th house Uranus and the Pluto hanging out in the 4th as well. So that's what's happening in your 4th house this month. That is the theme of the month. Meanwhile, another set of transits that I have circled for everybody this month is we have a kind of a T-square coming through. The full moon is going to be in your 9th house in Gemini, where you also are going to have the sun and Mercury in Sagittarius in your 3rd house. And all of these are working throughout the month through squares to Neptune and Pisces in the 6th house. Basically, what this means is that there is kind of ideological, intellectual, mental, spiritual tension that exists this month. And you might be working through it in a bit of a fog or a haze. There's kind of some divine confusion, potential for a lot of learning and growth. But also, you're going to have to look at, dogma. It's easy to become dogmatically fixed in our ideas and attitudes about life, and not be open to higher guidance, to not be open to that nudge from the universe that comes. The 3rd house, Sun and Mercury in Sagittarius, imply that you might be feeling pretty strongly about things, especially things, again, that are going to be related to home and family and so forth, with the dispositor Jupiter being in your fourth house of home and family. But the moon in the ninth and the square to Neptune is maybe calling for you to see things from a different perspective. You have to remember that this full moon in Gemini in the ninth house of higher beliefs is disposed of by its ruler Mercury, who is in its detriment in Sagittarius, opposite to the moon, which suggests a degree of conflict mentally or intellectually or ideologically this month. I don't want to say that you're not, you just have you have the Sagittarians, or excuse me, Librans have the potential this month to be a little fixed in their own view of something. And that's unusual because usually Librans, I think, are pretty diplomatic, right? And that could be a good thing. It may be a time to stand strong in something you really feel passionate about. On the other hand, the full moon in the ninth with Neptune in the sixth might be asking you to kind of consider a perspective that's different. Consider people's needs that are different from your own. And maybe there's also some sense in needing to sacrifice something of yourself on behalf of others and to just honor where other people are coming from. Now, of course, even though I think this is more likely, it could be the reverse where you need to speak up and tell people what your needs are and just be really clear about it so that people understand how to give you what you need, as opposed to dancing around it and maybe feeling like you're getting, sucked up in other people's needs or energy when, it's not what you need, or it's going to drain you. Okay, so watch for that energy throughout the month, but especially around the full moon of the 11th. Right around that time, you've got Venus going through the conjunctions of Saturn and Pluto as well. So like 10th to the 15th of the month, pretty intense. But you could also stand to learn a lot. There could be really inspiring moments of kind of breakthrough, clarity, receiving clarity, and maybe comprehending something at a deeper or broader level than you've been able to recently. So a kind of mental, intellectual feeling of potential here that I really like as well. All right, so going on from here, the last transit of the month that I'm going to mention is going to be around the 20th of the month. We see Venus is going to enter the sign of Aquarius in your fifth house and move into a square with Uranus in the eighth house. And this is happening right about the same time that Jupiter is heading through a trine to Uranus from the fourth house. It's interesting. This feels like a moment of breakthrough around relationships. Venus in the fifth house is about pleasure, pleasing things, creativity, joy, sexuality. It has the need to find pleasure. Venus in Saturn's sign in the fifth, it's not always easy to sort of let your hair down and just really have fun. Librans sometimes remember, Libra is the exaltation of Saturn. Librans sometimes there's a feeling of needing to harmonize to the extent that it's hard to really let go and just be whoever you are because of sometimes the fear that it's going to be disruptive to others, or that you're sometimes too aware of what other people think or feel. This is a moment where I feel like Librans have the potential to have some kind of creative breakthrough where your regard for other people is important, but if you need to, kind of take the reins a little bit more and do something for yourself, or, just let people know that this is what I'm going to do. This is what I like. This is what makes me happy. And if it tips the scales a little bit, that's not the worst thing in the world. This could also be a moment where you need to sort of I think that the tension, eighth house, for example, Uranus, has to do with the esteem of other people and the value of other people, and that they bring into your life, or that they place upon you. Sometimes there's a feeling of indebtedness and so forth. The feeling of needing to break out of some kind of debt, or to have some kind of confrontation about what I owe, or what people think I owe them, or what other people owe me, or what I think they owe me, and to clear the air somehow. But ultimately here, there's also the potential for a lot of fun and creativity and sort of experimentation and originality just on a creative level, or even just having a lot of fun and having some surprising twists and turns in relationships. So you watch for that energy towards the, around the 22nd. So that's what we've got for Librans. Let's go back to the beginning of the month and start over for Aquarians. So move this forward here so we get to Aquarius on the ascendant. Here we go. Now, for Aquarians, the Jupiter, or the Capricornian emphasis this month falls into your 12th house. That's a heavy house to have a lot of Capricorn energy piling up in. First of all, the entrance of, well, first of all, when you have a huge lineup of planets in there, and let's review, we've got Jupiter coming in on December 3rd. You've got Venus conjoining Saturn and Pluto between the 10th and the 14th. And you've got the 25th and the 26th, a solar eclipse happening with Jupiter in the 12th house. All of that is really big, plus Jupiter's making a trine to Uranus in your 4th house around the winter solstice. So a lot of emphasis on the 12th house this month. 12th house was originally called Malas Daimon, or evil spirit. Sounds worse than it is in some ways. It just means all of those influences that tend to take us off course, or that lead us astray. But there is also a sense in the 12th house of the dark night of the soul, where we are laboring with something difficult that is taking us out of our center, but may also be rebirthing us, or maybe remaking us into someone new. But we first have to lose the plot a little bit to get there. Right now, Aquarians, for a while, you've been dealing with Saturn in your 12th house and with Pluto in your 12th house for a long time. Things are coming to a head in January for Aquarians with Saturn and Pluto conjunction in the 12th house. It is a big moment of sort of reckoning for Aquarians. But this month, some of the themes also that are sort of promising include the entrance of Jupiter into the 12th and a solar eclipse with Jupiter in the 12th, both of which point to the potential for a season of expansion and growth, coming to be more enlightened, starting to have a broader understanding of yourself and your own shadows, or the suffering of the world, the reality of impermanence and transience, all of which can deeply spiritualize your life and your consciousness. But it's really dependent upon you sort of being able to see things as they are. Jupiter in Capricorn in the 12th can tell itself a story about how great something is when actually you're becoming more confined, more isolated, more depressed. More of your worst self is coming out, and you're telling yourself a happy story about it. That's what you want to avoid with Jupiter in the 12th right now. Meanwhile, Jupiter in the 12th hitting, the trine to Uranus in the 4th can bring this kind of revolution at the roots, where there is a sense of awakening happening around the topic of home, family, your living environment. But it's requiring, or it involves some kind of real, you may fall out of your center a little bit. There may be a kind of segue emotionally, mentally, spiritually, where you feel a little lost, or you feel like something is happening that is disruptive. It's disruptive at the roots. And yet, ultimately, if you ride with this, trust this experience is guiding you, not something that's afflicting you, there will be progress and there will be major breakthroughs. The solar eclipse promises that. Jupiter itself promises that. But you have to be very real with yourself, and don't tell yourself a big story about how great something is if it isn't. That's very important. Saturn with Venus and Pluto with Venus from the 10th to the 14th implies that this may also involve you taking a very hard look at your relationships this month. Whether that's a sister, Venus, or a women in your life, Venus, or a love in your life, Venus, the deeper transformation of relationships and a kind of getting real or coming to Jesus moment, so to speak, around love and relationships is also implied. So some deeper work for Aquarians this month. I think Aquarians have one of the more challenging signatures for the month of December in all of the 12 that I went through. But that often means the most potential for growth as well. We can't forget that these two things go hand in hand. All right, so the other thing that we're going to look at next is the confluence of planets going through the axis of Sagittarius, Gemini, and Pisces this month. Oops, here we go. So you're going to see on the 7th of the month, the sun is going to go through a square to Neptune. And then on around the 20th, Mercury is going to go through a square to Neptune. But even more important than that is the fact that on the 11th of the month, let's see if I can go back to the 11th. Right around the 11th into the 12th, the full moon is going to land in Gemini, creating a little bit of a T-square. So you've got, this is just creating a little T here. So you've got both the Sun and Mercury this month passing through squares to Neptune, while the full moon is going to land in Gemini and light up a little T-square. So you've got 11 houses, 11, 2, and 5. These are all succedent houses, and they have a lot to do with things that are going to bear fruit in the future, which means that the things happening now are going to have long-term consequences. When there's a bunch of energy heading through succedent houses, you're talking about the kinds of events that are going to play out in months to come. So the things happening right now will have long-term effect and consequences. This is because succedent houses are moving into the angular houses where they manifest or sort of blossom, but they're not there yet. But you are dealing with deeper, longer-term changes in these three areas. The 11th house, the area of friends, allies, groups, colleagues, and so forth. The 5th house is a house that has to do with pleasant things, pleasant experiences, enjoyable experiences. It's a Venusian house. So the idea of what brings you pleasure and the kind of the beat of your own creative drum that you are marching to, 5th house. 11th house has more to do with the social connections that you share and the larger community or the larger joy that you experience through others that you have some commonalities with. And when we see the full moon in the 5th house, in the sign of Mercury, and we see Mercury in the opposite sign of the moon at that time, that, and Mercury's debilitated as well, that suggests that there's going to be a level of ideological or intellectual tension this month. It may have something to do with your friends or your social life, colleagues in the workplace, and some kind of creative or intellectual tension that you are experiencing personally with them. Or within an organization, there could be some kind of greater, intellectual or philosophical divergence that you're seeing and the need to try to reconcile it. With Neptune in the 2nd house of money and finances, there may also be questions about your sense of worth or your sense of self-esteem or your sense of value. It's not the month to make gross compromises of yourself because you're worried that you won't be liked or that you're worried that you won't be taken care of, or that you're worried about, like making huge compromises because you want to be more popular, or because you're worried that you won't be taken care of, that something bad will happen. Neptune in the 2nd can pull on those heartstrings that says, that say you're not going to be provided for, and you're not going to be safe or secure materially, or you're not going to be liked, or something like that. But the other thing that can come through, quite frankly, and this is going to sound a little paradoxical, but the other thing that can come through is sort of miraculous levels or forms of support from other people, allies that come into your life and just say, this is something that that you're just going to receive from other people, some form of support. People may also be really singing your praises this month as they find that you are someone very valuable, or you have something very valuable to offer. You just want to be careful that you're not getting taken advantage of, or that you're not taking advantage of others. And you also, it's not a bad month to really look very carefully at who you are and what your own creative path looks like, what brings you happiness, and whether or not your larger friends or social life can provide that for you. And then look at how you're using your time, money, energy, and resources, and look at deeper questions about self-worth. So a few things there to think about for sure. And I think the other thing that one more thing that I'll just add into this is saying, you can always tell that if you're not with the right group of people, because your voice of conscience will be telling you, this isn't really me. So watch for that this month. When and where do you feel like this is really me? And sometimes we have to make compromises. We can't be fully ourselves 24/7. We compromise all the time. But if there are compromises that are happening where your voice of conscience is saying, this really isn't me, and then the little demon on the other shoulder is saying, yeah, but you need this, or they really like that about you, or isn't this great, or whatever. Be careful of that sort of superficial voice that's trying to convince you to be someone that you're not. Okay, now finally, we have the last transit of the month that I want to take a look at is Venus's square to Uranus. Now, Venus's square to Uranus will happen right around December 20th, right about the solstice. And we have Venus entering your 1st house and home sign of Aquarius, making a square to Uranus in the 4th house. This is a moment where the need for greater liberation, freedom, independence, to break free from limitations, to experiment, to be original and creative is really calling out to you. That's why I said earlier this month, the potential for you to feel like you're not being yourself leading up to some kind of deeper confrontation and then the need to break free and kind of liberate or redefine yourself. This may have to do with moving. Well, I don't feel like myself around my roommates. I need my own place. Remember, the 12th house also says that it could be just the right time in your life to focus on having a little bit more time alone or a little bit more time for seclusion, rest, privacy. Oftentimes Aquarians are very social people. But there's that saying, Aquarians love humanity but hate people. Sometimes, you need to make sure that you're honoring the need for distance that you have as a Saturn-ruled sign. And this Venus square to Uranus could be the need for some kind of personal redefining or liberation. Let's get free of something related to your roots, to your home, to your family, to your living environment. Something foundational needs to change this month, and it's got to be redirecting to make sure that I'm still my own creative self and I'm not compromising that too much. So that is what is coming there with the last transit of the month, Venus square to Uranus. That happens around the 22nd. Now, let's go back to the start of the month again, and let's take a look for Geminis. So for Gemini, the energy from Capricorn that we're looking at is falling into the 8th house. The 8th house, of course, well, let's go over them really quick before we dive into that. So the 8th house begins with Jupiter entering the 8th house on December 2nd into the 3rd. And then you've got the Venus conjoining with Saturn and Pluto around the 10th to the 14th. And then a new moon solar eclipse with Jupiter in Capricorn on the 25th into the 26th. So that's the lineup of Capricornian energy this month. Now, the 8th house was traditionally called the gate of Hades, and it's associated with the value or the esteem of other people. And so one thing that we have to be really careful about for Geminis this month is Jupiter in the 8th house suggests, riches, abundance, expansion, growth, etc., coming through from other people. So in other words, you can be highly valued or praised or celebrated by other people, or people may take a liking of you, or a liking to you, or they may say, I want to give you something or help you with something. This is a house that has to do with karmic debts and obligations, things that people owe us, as well as things that we owe other people. Now, Jupiter in the 8th house is not a bad transit in terms of there just being a lot of gifts coming through other people in the year ahead. But with Jupiter in its fall in Capricorn, you want to be careful that that's not compromised in any way. In other words, that Jupiter isn't giving you some kind of, like people who want to give you something, but only if you, twist and contort yourself into the shape that they like or they want. The reason for the potential for this is that Jupiter in Capricorn is potentially pushing the agenda of Saturn in the 8th house, which is oftentimes about what other people really want or need or demand from us. And it can also get really bottom line and sort of Machiavellian, where Jupiter and Saturn say, well, the bottom line is, this is what I need from you. This is what I want from you. And so the potential to be objectified or to objectify someone else is there in the year ahead. Again, of course, it is not a crime to receive help from other people. And, if you're, for example, I imagine that if you're an actor in Hollywood, or if you are a creative soul of any kind, there are creative compromises that we have to make due to the industries that we're in. Like, someone will say, well, I need you to change your book in some way because it's got to appeal to a broader audience. And you're like, well, that's my creative work, Prince had a stacked 8th house, and he went to war with the record company over the rights to his own music. The question about, sort of propriety and who owns me and what do I owe to other people and what am I trying to get from other people, these are really important questions. A lot of good things can come through your relationship with other people and things that they are going to give you in exchange for things that you give them. That's really important in the year ahead, but you just want to be careful that there's not any kind of gross compromise of your integrity happening. We can see also between the 10th and the 14th, Venus's conjunction with Saturn and Pluto can mean that there's a deeper and more challenging theme in relationships or friendships that are taking place. There's a theme of potentially the end of a relationship or the end of an agreement of some kind, or the finalization of something. And sometimes the rebirth. This would be a good time if you need to change or rework or restructure a contract, but also don't be surprised if agreements somehow need to end or die completely or be let go of. This can also be a time where you want to be careful about like taking advantage and being taken advantage of by others, like sexually, emotionally, romantically, with Venus conjoined to Saturn and Pluto. This is also a time where the themes of death and mortality and more serious, heavier themes around love and relationships can emerge for you this month. So those are some things to look at this month for Geminis in the 8th house. I do think that you stand to benefit a lot from other people in the year ahead, but questions around how much I want to compromise or not are going to be a question. You got Jupiter making a trine to Uranus around the winter solstice in the 12th house. It's a similar idea, the potential for some kind of breakthrough, for some kind of liberating and expansive moment. But again, with the 12th house involved, is it self-destructive? Are you compromising too much? 8th house kinds of questions as well about debts and obligations to other people. So, all right, that's what we're seeing for Capricorn energy this month. Let's take a look at Sag, because there's a Sagittarius, Pisces, and Gemini axis. There's actually a lot going on there as well. So the full moon around the 11th is going to fall right into your first house home sign of Gemini, while your ruling planet Mercury is opposed in Sagittarius in the 7th house. We've also got both the Sun and Mercury going through squares to Neptune and Pisces in your 10th house. So effectively, we have a month where there is a sort of T-square forming in the energy of the month between houses 1, 7, and 10. Okay, so this is about ideological, philosophical conflicts and compromises in relationships that have to do specifically with your career. There are deep questions happening right now as to how strongly you should hold to your own beliefs or succumb to the persuasion of other people. You can meet teachers, influential people who really legitimately want to help you, and you can meet people who are trying to persuade you in ways that aren't positive, or vice versa. You can be someone who's trying to bring over others to your perspective, and this could be a really positive thing. There can be healing here. It's not a bad thing to help people come to the light, or for someone to help us to come to the light in some way. You just want to make sure that with Jupiter in that lineup of planets in the 8th house, that there aren't covert, secret, selfish motives fueling things or fueling the compromises that we're making and that we're asking others to make. So watch for that. Now, that is also taking us into the last transit of the month, which is going to be Venus in the sign of Aquarius in your 9th house, a house of higher beliefs and the higher mind, making a square to Uranus in the 12th house in Taurus. So this is interesting, right? Because it looks as though there is some kind of revolution taking place toward the very end of the month that's very mental, philosophical, spiritual, but it's impacting your relationships at the exact same time, which is exactly what we were talking about with the T-square energy between the 1st, 7th, and 10th houses, the squares from Mercury and the Sun to Neptune. Now we're seeing a sort of replay or reboot of that same energy, but now it's about some kind of breakthrough that needs to happen philosophically. For example, this is the moment where you say, okay, look, I've wanted to please you, but this is what I really think. Or, look, I've been in this relationship, but I really have a very different set of ideals or beliefs about the way things should be done. And I just need to be clear about that. I need to present you with what I'm thinking. This can cause sudden disruptions, fractures, or breaks in agreements or relationships. But ultimately, the question is about your integrity here. The need to be free mentally, spiritually, intellectually is going to be very strong. At the same time, you want to be careful because this has the potential to be a little rebellious and defiant. Like, this is what I think and feel, and I don't care what you think. Somewhere between trying to, piss other people off and be ourselves and be free of any kind of compromise, which is oftentimes way too rigid. Even if it feels good, it's too rigid, and being way too compromising and not actually revealing to others how we feel and what we think. Right there, somewhere in the middle, is where we're all supposed to be. these transits this month, especially this one, are going to get you there. So the ideal thing to do is to not be in a place that's highly reactionary, where you're like, this is how I feel and screw you. Or because if you have to get to that point, it got too far. But on the other hand, you know, you don't want to be, you don't want to be so strong that you burn a bridge. But at the same time, some degree of greater intellectual or mental freedom is needed right now. And you just have to, sometimes it's like, I've got too many irons in the fire. I've got to quit one job or one contract or something like that. At the same time, your understanding mentally, intellectually could be completely revolutionizing. This is also a great time to just tune into any kind of interesting, eclectic, or, you know, avant-garde art or music or film or some kind of spiritual teaching that is shifting your paradigm. Those are some things to watch for. All right, that's what I've got for you guys this month. I hope that this was interesting for all of you air signs. Tell me how it is in the comments section below. Tell me how your month is going. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back in January for the first horoscopes of 2020. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.